South Hills, what's up? Today is part 3 of the Revolutionary War, and today what we're going to talk about is the actual war after hostilities have fully broken out. Just so you know how I'm going to do this is I'm going to really quickly go through the war, skipping many chapters. Now, the reason I'm skipping chapters is because of time. We want to get through this Revolutionary War before we're all 85 years old, and I'm even more bald than I am right now. So, today we talk about the war itself. What you see on your screen right here is the Supreme Commander of the Continental Army, the first President of the United States, the man on the $1 bill, none other than George Washington. So George Washington is this man sitting here upon a horse. Just as a general statement, as a country, as a new fledgling nation trying to gain independence, it is a true miracle that we won this war and became an independent nation. If you were to look at just on paper and compare America's ability to fight war to England's ability to fight war, we should have been absolutely destroyed. So the question we have to ask ourselves is then, well, what happened? How did we win this war against all odds, against the most advanced, largest military in the world at that time? The answer is in no small part motivation, knowledge of American terrain, the willingness to fight more like a Native American, and probably, not probably, I would say for sure, the most important single factor was military leadership. Lucky for us, we had some of the most fantastic military leaders in the world at that time that were able to see us through very difficult times and win this war. So, and we have to give all the credit to George Washington. Another individual that you see down here in the screen, I'm going to go ahead and highlight him so you can see. I'm going to circle him. What color should I use? Let's go with green. This guy right here, I'm circling in green. Boom. That right there is Marquis Lafayette. Now, Lafayette is a Frenchman who came to America to fight for us. And he saw us as a worthy cause, and he would really become George Washington's closest friend. So there he is, the Marquis de Lafayette. We'll talk about him and his importance in the war later on. Okay. So the Continental Army, like I said, the Continental Army is what we refer to the colonies' armies. Okay, that was our side. We were the Continental Army. And the Continental Army, like I said, was mostly militia. So what a militia is basically a bunch of like bankers, farmers, teachers, lawyers, doctors. We're talking just regular people without any formal military training who just happen to have guns, and they picked them up and used them. So if you look at what our capabilities were versus England, which had a large regular army, of course, being well trained and be professional, they get paid to do it. On paper, there's just no comparison. So the Continental Army, there was no army in America. And in fact, if you think about it, leading up to the Revolution, the army that would have protected Americans was the British Army. We were a British colony. Know the land, better leadership. The British had some serious advantages on their side, of course, and the most important thing they had was resources. They're a large world empire, well established, unlike us. So we won against all odds. And like I said, George Washington was appointed commander-in-chief of the Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress. Now, the Continental Congress is basically a delegation of people from all over the colonies. We're talking like colonial leaders who got together and made final decisions. And the Second Continental Congress was basically a group of men got together, and I say men literally, they were all just men. They got together and they decided, okay, we are going to officially fight this war now, and we're going to appoint George Washington as our commander-in-chief, who was a much better military leader than he was during the French and Indian War because, well, he got that experience and applied it. So there he is. This is what he would have looked like at the time of the Revolution. Not the super old guy that we see on the dollar bill. That's when he was president. George Washington was in his 40s. George Washington is a remarkable individual, period. He is one of those individuals who really had just like an outsized impact on history. And a lot of it had to do with his demeanor. George Washington was a tough dude. Like, he was not to be trifled with. And that made him a very good leader because people, when he said jump, they said how high. That's just how he was. He was very tall. He was very muscular, very athletic. And he had this quiet ability. Like, sometimes the best leaders are the ones who don't talk much. And George Washington was not a loud, bombastic type of person. He was more of the quiet thinking type, and he was thinking. He wasn't just quiet. That's George Washington. Okay, another individual who had a huge impact on this war was a guy who wasn't even an American. His name's Frederick Wilhelm von Steuben. Von Steuben was a Prussian. Now, this guy is a really important figure in the Revolutionary War because, like I said earlier, our Continental Army was pretty poorly trained and outfitted. And we needed someone to train a new army to be able to fight the British. This is where Frederick Wilhelm von Steuben comes in. So von Steuben was actually a great military commander. He was a Prussian. Now, just not to confuse you, what a Prussian is someone from Eastern Germany. It's Germany in Poland kind of today, but basically he's a Germanic person. He would have spoke German and stuff like that. Von Steuben was kicked out, or he lost his commission in the Prussian military because they discovered that he was a homosexual. And they didn't tolerate that in Prussia, and he was bounced. Now, he was actually recruited by Benjamin Franklin, another one of our founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin was sent to Europe with the express order to find talent to help the Continental Army win this war. And he couldn't have gotten luckier when von Steuben fell into his lap, because von Steuben was an amazing military commander. And his specialty was training soldiers. Booyah, there's the man. So he comes over to America, being recruited by Benjamin Franklin, and he actually is promised money that doesn't exist, because we're like, dude, we're fighting a war, we're a new nation. But when it's over, we promise to give you money and land. And von Steuben's like, well, I got nothing going on here in Prussia. Boom, I'm going to America. So von Steuben actually wrote what's called the Blue Book today. Now, the Blue Book is a set of basic rules that all good soldiers should follow. I mean, everything from like how your uniform should look, how you should physically train yourself, those kind of like really detailed questions. And a lot of what Frederick von Steuben wrote, is still in that Blue Book. So like American soldiers, even today, are benefiting from von Steuben's writings, which is impressive. So I'm going to back that up, pause it, write the notes, and moving on. The Marquis Lafayette, like I said, he was one of George Washington's closest friends, and he came over to America, actually led troops in battle, specifically the final battle of the Revolutionary War called Yorktown. And he is very instrumental in us winning the war, and probably his single greatest contribution as a Frenchman, he's not even American, to us gaining independence from England was the fact that he helped us to get the full commitment of the French government to help us win this war. Any historian who studies and understands the Revolutionary War is going to pretty much agree that French help was absolutely critical. You likely would not have become a nation without their assistance. And that assistance was in no large part secured by Lafayette. Fight a noble cause. Him and George become good friends. There they are. This is Mount Vernon. Mount Vernon is the family estate of George Washington, and there he is with Lafayette. By the way, you'll see down here in the corner an African-American woman. Yes, folks, no one is perfect, and we look back on history and sometimes apply our modern sensibilities to people. But the bottom line is George Washington, yes, he did have slaves. Is that a good thing? Absolutely not. Slavery was a horrible, abhorrent part of our history and has left a stain on America that, quite frankly, is still there. And so George Washington had slaves. But good thing he did free them upon his death. So George Washington freed slaves. That's a good thing. Okay, the first hostilities of the war. So I'm gonna skip through a lot of stuff. So the first actual like British people fighting against colonists in like firing lines were like pew 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 fighting against each other was Lexington and Concord. Now Lexington and Concord was really not a large battle. What was happening is there was a group of people called Minutemen. These are like American patriots who had pledged to, at the drop of a hat, within 1 minute, be prepared to fight the British. And they were stockpiling weapons because any army needs to have, the things that go bang, bang, kill, kill. And the British got intelligence of this stockpile of weapons that these patriots had created in this small village called Concord. And the British set about to go confiscate these weapons. Well, the Americans had spies. Spies are always part of war. And in the colonies, there was quite an extensive spy network that was actually run by George Washington, who were able to basically warn us that, hey, the British are going to come and try to take these weapons. And they've created this elaborate plan to alert the Minutemen that the British were coming and the way that they were going to go there, because they had two options. They could have gone by road, or they could have actually taken a ship. And so they had this elaborate plan to be able to alert people on how that was happening. And I guess the bottom line is this is where spies and intelligence pays off, because the British were absolutely harassed constantly on their march. They decided to march to Concord, and it was basically a great win for the Americans, because the British showed up to, first of all, an empty warehouse. There was no weapons there because they moved them. And on top of that, the British were just harassed. They were marching for miles. And through that whole entire march, they were just getting shot at. They were getting pot shots taken at them by American colonists the whole entire way. So the first actual shots fired here at Lexington Concord. Got it? Good. This right here is a famous image. It's Paul Revere. And Paul Revere famously did this whole midnight ride where he, in myth, runs through the streets of Massachusetts screaming, the British are coming, the British are coming, the British are coming. That is not at all how it happened. First of all, there's British patrolling heavily throughout that area. And if Paul Revere out there screaming the British are coming, he would have been arrested like that. He wasn't the only one doing this. There was other people. One guy can't warn everybody. So they had a plan to warn people that the British were coming through a series of, it was a network of the Sons of Liberty and Minutemen that he would tell one person, hey, the British are coming. And then that person's job was then to go tell other people the British were coming. So, but it worked, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. There's a lot of myths surrounding it, but the reality is it was a way to warn the colonists that the British were coming to take these weapons, and it worked. So this leads to another battle. Now, I really want to stress to you, I guess at this point in history, the British see our military and they recognize that we are poorly trained and poorly outfitted, and that they have a distinct advantage. And that advantage leads to recklessness. And the Battle of Bunker Hill, now I have Breed's Hill written here on the notes because the Battle of Bunker Hill is what we call it, but the vast majority of the actual fighting happened in an adjacent hill, Breed's Hill. And it was a fight over a hill. These hills overlooked Massachusetts Bay. And if you could take those hills and put cannons on top of those hills, you essentially could completely control the Boston Harbor, because you have guns pointed at ships. If they don't like the ship that's showing up, bang, bang, bye-bye, sink ship. So the Americans took up a position on top of these hills, knowing how strategically important they were. And the British, of course, wanted to take those hills. And they just marched up these bare hills. The hills didn't have any trees on them. And the British literally were just sending men up the hill in a hugely overconfident way. And basically, they were just marching to their deaths. And so the Battle of Bunker Hill, or Breed's Hill, is considered to be a great victory for America, for the colonists. However, we did end up losing that battle because we ran out of bullets. We weren't very well outfitted. And so the British literally had enough people march up that hill to get slaughtered and killed, to eventually we ran out of weapons, or we ran out of ammunition for our weapons. And there's a famous saying, one of the commanders on Bunker Hill said, "Don't fire until you can see the whites of their eyes." Basically, he's saying, look, we only have so much ammunition. There's a lot of British down there. They're going to keep coming at us. You can't waste shots that are bad. So wait until they get close enough that you're guaranteed to be able to hit your mark. Okay, so battle control Boston Harbor. Whoop. The British won, but at a high cost. Moral victories versus actual victories. This was a moral victory for America. Okay, so here you see the fighting. Down below Breed's Hill, there's a village that overlooked Boston Harbor. Of course, the British burnt it down. And you can see this ship down here. I'm going to circle it. the ship down here is firing upon that village. That's not good. But in the end, like I said, the Battle of Bunker Hill is kind of like, the reason it's important is because the colonists actually said, oh, we might actually be able to win this. This is something worth fighting for. Because a huge part of this is the psychological, basically thinking in America, like, oh, we can't win. The British, they're too powerful. There's too many of them. They're too well outfitted. Well, Bunker Hill proved that may be not actually the case. And so a lot of people joined the cause of the Patriots after this battle. So it's an important one. Here's the American colonists. They're in their firing lines and, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. And these are the British marching up the hill to their deaths, wearing red coats in line, perfectly easy to shoot. And you can see them marching over dead bodies, which would be, could you imagine? You march up a hill, and this happened several times. You march up the hill, the colonists shoot enough of you that you have to retreat. You go back down the hill, you regroup, you go back up the hill, shoot, go back down the hill, and more bodies are on the battlefield each time. That would be terrifying. I mean, maybe I'm a coward. Yeah, maybe I am. But, I think all of us would be scared. I don't care who you are. Okay, we're fast forwarding through time here. Okay, just as a general statement, the American Army after Bunker Hill suffered a series of defeats. The British Army was, like I said, more powerful, and our army was very nearly broken until this major turning point happened. It's called the Battle of Trenton, New Jersey. So this battle really demonstrates the genius of George Washington, and this is one of the reasons that he always go down in history as this great, amazing leader. So George Washington's army is very nearly broken. They're running from the British. The British have our army on the run, and we are essentially just unable to withstand the pressure of the British army. And there's a problem. See, the British army was on one side of the Delaware River, and our army was on the other side of the Delaware River. And it's wintertime, and the Delaware River will eventually freeze. And once that happens, the British will be able to just walk across the river and just annihilate our army. And George Washington knew that. He knew that he had to do something bold, and he had to do it quick right now. So he waited till Christmas night to do a surprise attack and across the Delaware River in what was at this time a tiny little village called Trenton. The British had withdrawn. They were hanging out in Philadelphia, just waiting for the river to freeze. And there was a small detachment of what are called Hessians that were at the battle, that were in Trenton. There's about 3,000 of them. Hessians are basically German mercenaries that the British had hired to fight for them. And Hessians were terrifying. They were some of the best outfitted and best military in the world. I mean, these guys literally get paid by governments to go around the world and fight battles for them. And the Hessians had been very, successful against our army. So George Washington thinks this is a great opportunity for us to kind of bounce back, come back. Comebacks have to start somewhere. So on Christmas night, our army gets on boats and ferries across the Delaware River without the Hessians having a darn clue we were doing it. And the timing was key because it was Christmas. And Hessians are Christians, and they're celebrating Christmas. And Germans like to drink, and the Hessians, reportedly were drinking very heavily that night. And George Washington wanted to take advantage of that. He wanted to catch these people completely unaware and in a bad state, mentally, physically, and the whole bit. So George Washington gets his army across the Delaware River, and now dawn is breaking. He attacks the Hessian outpost, and literally these guys are still in bed. In fact, the commander of the Hessians was still in bed almost through the entire battle. Apparently, he was just, sleeping it off. And, it was such an amazing resounding success. Basically, George Washington's army barely lost anyone. The people who died in the Battle of Trenton died because they were marching to Trenton without shoes on, and it began to snow, and they literally froze to death. Or they got sick and had disease. No one was killed. It was like a miracle. And, a miracle sometimes is what you need to come back as a military. Absolutely happened here. And George Washington is a man who made it happen. So, surprise attack on Hessians in Trenton. The war was going badly. Across the night, This is such a famous painting that you're looking at right here. This painting is like one of the most iconic paintings of the Revolutionary War. It also happens to be completely inaccurate. It has George Washington standing up in a boat. No one stands up in a boat. You know, he'd be like, sit down, bro. You have this, you know, basically what it appears to be a river that's beginning to freeze here. It was going to freeze, but they wouldn't have had these gigantic chunks of ice that you see here. It's daytime, which is a problem because this happened in the dead of night, and it was actually in a snowstorm, so that you don't see a snowstorm here happening either. But the bottom line, though, still a cool picture, right? That's a Hessian. Pointy hats. Yeah. This is the Battle of Trenton. Great victory. You know, we caught the Hessians completely unaware. Had the Hessians been prepared, it probably would have been a rout. You know, the Hessians had better outfits, you know, better, you know, weapons and training and the whole bit. Okay, another massive turning point. Okay, skipping through time to Saratoga. The Battle of Saratoga happened in New York, and basically the British had devised a plan in the war. This was their big scheme plan. They were going to cut the colonies in half. They were going to isolate the Northeast from the South, and thereby kind of divide and conquer. And they wanted to literally just create a line of British outposts in their military to cut between the two of them. And Saratoga was the key to being able to do this. But we won, yay! And we won the Battle of Saratoga in no small part because of their leader. And this guy is called Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was one of the best generals in the Continental Army. However, Benedict Arnold's name is mud in this country. It's trash in this country. He is considered to be the greatest traitor in almost all of our history, if not the single greatest traitor. Because in the end, he actually defected back to the British. So keep in mind, you know, the Revolutionary War in a lot of ways is a civil war. It's like, you know, people who are loyal to Britain, people who just came from England, fighting against people who want to break away. And, you know, it's kind of fluid. I mean, keep in mind, George Washington fought for the British. You know, now he's fighting against the British. The same is the case with Benedict Arnold. He chose the side of the colonists, but he had been passed over throughout the war many times for promotion. And he was a fantastic general, and he was a brave general. In fact, at the Battle of Saratoga, he was wounded so badly he nearly lost his leg, and yet continued to fight and lead his men to victory. However, Benedict Arnold in the end defected back because he'd been passed over so many times for promotion. And a lot of it had to do also with a new wife. He had married a young lady who was essentially a loyalist. She was pro-Britain, and she had convinced him that his best bet was to, you know, go back and be part of the British Empire. She saw this whole colonist revolutionary war thing as a fool's errand and that we were going to lose. So Benedict Arnold defects, but still a great hero of the Revolutionary War. I mean, it's kind of a tragedy. In a weird way, it's a tragedy, I guess, because Benedict Arnold was a great general. He was a great hero of the war, yet made the wrong decisions, and in the end, his whole career is ruined. And later on in life, he would say that his single biggest mistake was to defect back to Britain. He probably would have become a president, if not a president, maybe someone, you know, very powerful in the American government. But he blew it. He made the wrong decision. Stay loyal. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Saratoga also was key because it foiled Britain's plan to cut our colonies in half. But it also was a very important victory in the sense that after Saratoga, the French and the Spanish openly supported us. They actually started putting soldiers and money and time and effort into our war effort. A lot of it was lobbying. You know, we had Benjamin Franklin and you had Thomas Jefferson, who are both Americans in France, doing their absolute best to convince them to join us in our war effort. They saw the victory at Saratoga and were like, yay, we're going to go ahead and help you now. Because, you know, keep in mind, the French and Indian War was not that long ago. The French and the British still are very much adversaries, if not out and out enemies, which of course they become. This is where Saratoga happened. This is a battlefield, beautiful New York, upstate New York. It's gorgeous up there. New York is not just a big city, it's also a state. And it's a very wild, open kind of state, you know, like a lot of wilderness. Right there, that is a memorial to the Battle of Saratoga. It happened right there. And this one's kind of interesting. This is actually a memorial for Benedict Arnold. This is the only memorial for Benedict Arnold at all. And it actually doesn't have his name on it. What they're doing in the memorials, they acknowledge Benedict Arnold's place in history, but at the same time, don't give him all the credit because of the fact that he was a traitor. So he doesn't have his name on this. That's his boot that you see right there. And that boot signifies his wound that he suffered there, where he nearly lost his leg and he never walked right again after that. Okay, the final battle. This is where we win. Now, the tide is turning in our favor. A huge factor. The French are helping us now. The French have an actual navy, whereas we did not. Bold leadership from George Washington turning the tide of the war. So the Battle of Yorktown is the final battle, and this is where we win. So it's the end. The leader of the British is a man named Cornwallis. He surrenders to George Washington, and there it is. So the details of the Battle of Yorktown, it was a siege. It was a siege of a harbor in Virginia called Yorktown, and it all goes down. And Lafayette's key. Von Steuben's fighting too. I mean, like, we have a lot of help, and that foreign help really made a big difference in us winning the Revolutionary War. Okay, there it is. Cornwallis surrenders. And folks, here's the end. Okay, the big question, I think, is even the more important question of the Revolutionary War. Okay, we know what happened. We know that we won this war against all odds. We know that we finally had someone to train our army in von Steuben. We had Lafayette bringing in the French. We had all these things kind of break our way toward the end of the war. But when it was all said and done, the question still loomed, and it loomed pretty heavily. How do we create a nation now? Winning a war, great. That's one thing. But actually ruling and administering a nation and creating a nation of laws and a nation of liberty that values human life and values, dignity and all the things that we think of when we think of America. At least I think of it when I think of America. We are a nation that has created a system to avoid tyranny and reward hard work, liberty, justice, things that I think all of us kind of universally yearn for as humans, no matter where you live. So how do we create it now? That's the next big question. That's the next big chapter. Yay, we won a war. But now we have a nation that we have to build. And that's where the hard work really starts.